You want to know more about obscure Vita games? Well, every Vita game is an obscure Vita game. Today I'm looking at Hotaru no Nikki, aka the Firefly Diary, aka htoL #Nick. If I could describe this game in onomatopoeia, it would sound like, oh, yeah, huh, oh, But in 2 words, it would be gorgeously unfair. The Firefly Diary deceptively lures you in with its gorgeous hand-drawn backgrounds, kawaii protagonists, and somber music. But just below the sugary surface, there lies an unforgiving evil. Hotaru no Nikki was the creation of illustrator Masayuki Furuya, whom previously worked as an illustrator on Disgaea D2. The Firefly Diary was his first effort at directing his own game, while still taking over as the lead illustrator, and man, does it show. It seems as if the style took precedence over the gameplay here, as the greatest assets found within the Firefly Diary lie in the artistic design, not the gameplay. The backgrounds are hand-drawn layers that are often found in similar indie 2D platformers, but with a distinct Japanese influence. The environments are tremendous in detail, as each piece of scenery was cleverly positioned to complement the unique lighting and shadow engine found within. The game begins when a lone girl with horns awakes on an operating table in the middle of a destroyed laboratory. Here, you're introduced to the protagonist Mion, which roughly translates to demon in English. You won't be controlling Mion directly. Instead, you play as the 2 fireflies that accompany her. Lumen, a green firefly that navigates the light, and Umbra, the purple firefly that navigates the dark. The gameplay is centered around keeping Mion safe and getting her out of the decrepit cavern. Mion moves based on the position of Lumen on the screen. The fairy-dependent movement can take some getting used to, as indirect control of Mion isn't as responsive as direct control would be. At its best, the movement system echoes the old point-and-click puzzlers like Wario and Mario. At its worst, well, you'll see. Mion will continually move in the direction Lumen is on the screen, but you can also click on Mion to have her sit still. The biggest problem I have with the fairy system is the unnecessary difficulty added not because of challenge, but because of the control scheme. There's an awkward buffering when Mion changes directions, which requires you to move Lumen from one extreme side of the map to the other. You have to constantly dash in opposite sides of Mion's position in order to make split-second decisions to get Mion out of harm's way. The default control scheme is touch-based, which poses a huge problem when you're trying to see the objects on the screen. You're gonna find your fingers will often smudge up the screen, and with the constant movements required by Lumen, you'll need to stop and clean the screen between deaths. It's kind of annoying. Another big design flaw is the problem controlling Umbra. Umbra relies entirely on the back touchpad of the Vita to navigate the shadows. The problem with the back touchpad is that it's slightly smaller in size than the front screen of the Vita, so often your finger's going to slide off. And I also experienced some issues in the response time of the back touchpad. I don't know what's going on with it, but it never seems to match the movements of my fingers as accurately as the front. I recommend switching over the controls to Type-C from the get-go. Type-C allows you to play the game with the analog sticks on the Vita. Don't expect it to solve all your control problems, because it doesn't. For the purpose of this review, I'm playing on the PlayStation TV, so the only way you can play on the PlayStation TV is with a PS3 or PS4 controller. We're going to talk about why that poses a problem in a minute. For now, let's focus on what the game does right. So the game starts with a small degree of challenge to ease you into the gameplay. It focuses a bit more on the immersion in the world of the Firefly Diary, and it enchants you with its gorgeous visuals and ambient soundtrack. You'll notice how Lumen illuminates the areas and casts shadows from the objects strewn about in the world. The lighting of the layers adds greater depth and purpose to the 2D realm. And the layers have meaning, as you'll be taking cues from the environment to provide you with solutions to navigate Mion through the rest of the level. And you'll have to look pretty closely in some areas of the game because scattered throughout the game are hidden plants called memory fragments. Usually these fragments require you to go out of your way to find them, but when you do, you're rewarded with a bit of extra story. When you touch a memory fragment, the style of the game will dramatically shift to an isometric Game Boy Advance, think Mega Man Battle Network-esque pixel art style that tells you a little bit about Mion's past. In order to get the true ending of the game, you need to collect every single memory fragment, and that's not always possible your first time through. It's an obvious comparison to make, but the story of Hotaru no Nikki reminded me of Yume Nikki, aka the Dream Diary. The story is told more by the environment and situations Mion finds herself in, and less with any sort of expositional dialogue, because not a single piece of dialogue or text is ever presented outside of tutorials. From the rusted, decaying post-apocalyptic structures to a jungle of foliage projecting an untamed yet beautiful wilderness, it's refreshing to see a game treat its world as just as much of an important character as the protagonists themselves. The story, like the gameplay, goes from calm and inviting to absolutely horrifying after a few levels, and all of it is delivered visually. The atmospheric music draws the player into the decayed underground with its wall of sound, dampened by the filter of the cavern walls. The soundtrack evokes a melancholic, lonely feeling with a touch of dread in the air. This is really great work by Hajime Sugi, and according to my research, this was the first game he's ever composed. I can't wait to hear his work on the sequel. I will not let this game beat me. That was my mantra for the Firefly Diary. The first couple chapters of the game are fairly easy. You push a box, you flip a switch, you enter the shadows with Umbra, and watch out for the monsters. Repeat. Then, you quickly learn that you were never in control. The game only allowed you to think you were. Mion has the vulnerability of a Fabergé egg in a hurricane. She is solely dependent on the guidance of the Fireflies. If you're not paying attention and you don't tell Mion to sit still, she's gonna wander off cliffs to her death, drown in water, walk into saw blades, take a seed to the dome, or get killed by a falling box. You never stop looking after her. The protect Mion-centered gameplay is easier said than done, because her deaths will reach the double-digit numbers before you're able to clear an area. You learn that not only is protecting Mion your objective, but now you also have to protect Lumen as well, in what I like to call the operation puzzles. A few times in the game, Mion will become incapacitated, and you will need to guide Lumen through narrow mazes, where, if you touch a wall or an electric pole, Lumen will explode. Navigating these mazes with a controller is unnecessarily difficult, and it's not that much easier with the touchpad. It's even worse because all of these mazes are auto-scrollers, which forces you to solve them in a hurry, so accuracy takes a back seat. You will die and repeat, and many of you will quit the game at these portions, but I couldn't let this game win. Many of the deaths in the game are out of pure random circumstance. The random deaths become very apparent during the robot boss fight. During this boss fight, the objective here is to push the dynamite over to the robot and hope to God he eats it. You have to depress a switch to drop the dynamite, but don't walk under it, otherwise you're gonna get hit in the head and die. Meanwhile, the robot's screaming and dropping debris on your head and shooting his flamethrower. You have a small window of time to react and move Lumen to move Mion out of harm's way. This is especially difficult when Mion is pushing an object, as you have to move Lumen all the way down until Mion drops the object, and then to the left or right to move Mion. You need precise movements to dodge falling objects, but you also don't want to be near the TNT because the robot will take out its flamethrower and detonate it. Oh look, it's a minecart. I can just duck under here for safety. Oh, Oh, never mind. So if getting the robot to eat 3 sticks of dynamite wasn't hard enough, after the 3rd time, it will launch a giant missile at you. I was so frantic from making it that far in the fight that when a minecart fell, my instinct was just to get under it and wait for the missile to pass. No, that was the wrong strategy. I did this several times until I had to look up how to beat the robot. Apparently, there's a 2-second window when the robot opens his mouth that you need to switch to Umbra to detonate the missile in his mouth. No second chance. If you miss the window, you gotta do it all over again. Fuck me for trying. I eventually did it. So after that torture, you're treated to an umbrella segment where Mion has to float her way past obstacles. If controlling her wasn't difficult enough that far in the game, now you have to deal with floaty Mion and map out her trajectory by moving Lumen across the screen past monsters, blades, pits, and just as you're getting used to the awkwardness of the floaty controls, Mion gets a mushroom on her head, like Earthbound, and just like Earthbound, it reverses her controls. So now, you have to move Lumen the opposite way of Mion to guide her floaty butt through an auto-scroller level where you need to position Mion so she can move Umbra to deactivate a wall of spikes, but only some of them will freeze, but you can't stop the plane ahead. One false step and you will be crushed or lightly touched by a monster, or you're gonna float off the slowly moving platform that's needed to reach the rest of the maze. The human brain wasn't prepared for this kind of madness. So by some stroke of luck, you're able to get out of the cave, and you enter the forest. Here, you learn that Lumen can grow vines and cut vines. You also learn that Mion is extremely allergic to seeds. Now you gotta move Lumen to change the trajectory of the plants that spit out these seeds. It's a complete mess how you control these. The short answer is that you don't. The long answer is you have to fly Lumen into the plant and move the plant head, and then, whenever you get to the right angle, you gotta move Lumen as far as possible away from the plants to let go of them. Meanwhile, you're hoping the seeds don't bounce off walls and hit Mion in the head, but she keeps walking into them, and if she's too close to the plant, you can't click on Mion to have her sit down. And if you're not watching her, she's gonna get eaten by one of the carnivorous plants. But you need these seeds to hit a switch on this wall up here, and then you need to use the seeds to kill the monsters. So you just gotta deal with it. In the next area, you're forced to switch between growing vines and shooting seeds, but neither works the way you want them to work. And to add to it, you're making mistakes because there's a wall of shadows going to eat Mion at any moment. But something in your mind makes it keep going, and you make it. Here's your prize: a giant plant boss that shoots roots up from the ground, and occasionally will shoot a bigger root, which you need to get the dead bodies hanging above, which you then need to push forward the dead bodies into these little plants on the side of the map to kill the giant plant boss. This fight is unnecessarily long, as you completely depend on the randomness of the boss to play fair. And it's never fair. If Mion is so much as lightly touched by a root or accidentally walks into the mouth of one of the piranha plants, you're screwed. Good luck trying to push a dead body across the field while roots are shooting up at you. Despite it all, I kept pushing forward, and I made it to what I graciously refer to as that bullshit level from Monster Party section of the game. Here, you need to constantly pop back and forth between teleporting doors to flip a switch, to lower a platform, to cross the platform. Oh, by the way, don't go through the wrong door or you're gonna enter a death pit. You should have known better. Who you dealing with here? Oh, you finished that level? Okay, well, hey, remember those plants that can kill you with one seed? Let's turn that into an entire on-rail shooting segment where seeds can fly and bounce off of narrow walls, and you have to use those seeds to kill enemies so you can progress. Cool, I hated it. What's next? Pit of Flamethrowers, auto-scroller, with 2 extremely hard operation segments placed in between. Look at this. Do I really need to explain why I hate this level? Oh, by the way, see that plant up there? Right after you finish this maze, you need to use it to hit an off-screen button to turn off the flamethrowers before Mion rides into them. Sure, why not? I made it. Fuck you, game, I made it. What could possibly be worse than that? Oh my Jesus Christ, monkey balls. So, by I don't even know what kind of voodoo, you haven't rage quit yet, which kudos to you because goddamn that spiral. You've officially reached the third boss fight. I hope you brought 20/20 vision and a world of patience. The third boss fight is essentially that coin in 3 cups game from Suikoden meets I Spy. Did that make sense? Sure. You have to pay attention to the shadowy figure as he passes through an increasingly smaller opening in the curtains. And then you gotta pull the correct rope to identify the real boss. Then it switches to the light boss. The light boss hides behind 3 question blocks which are shuffled. Just pull the rope and hope you were able to follow his position during the shuffle. You have to pick both bosses correctly 10 times in order to win. You only get 3 mistakes, which if you do mess up, pixelated blocks cover the screen, making it even harder. With each correct guess, the bosses speed up until you're basically just guessing and hoping you pick the right guy. This fight takes absolutely no skill. It's pure luck that will carry you through to the end. As many reviewers complained, this boss fight is the very definition of artificial difficulty. Better yet, the entire game is the definition of artificial difficulty. And you know what? I absolutely loved it. There's just something about the bad controls and the bullshit boss design that made me want more. The story, although minimalist and abstract, kept me engaged throughout. I really wanted to know who Mion was and what happened to the world to make it so fucked up. After beating the game the first time, I wanted to go back and collect all the memory fragments. I wanted to fill in the gaps of the story and unlock the last level, because I couldn't see the game getting any harder at this point. I mean, come on. I was wrong. The last level is a tower defense section against a slew of enemies using the seed-spitting plants. Hooray! This is great. So you're trying to defend this tree, and you have to position the plants at odd angles to stop the shadowy monsters from destroying it. Meanwhile, monsters will occasionally eat your plants, and then you have to regrow them. I tried and died so many times, I can't even count. There's a final wave of monsters that just rush the tree, and your pea shooters aren't fast enough to do anything about it. Hey, guess what? If you cut the buds before turning them into seed shooters, they'll drop and turn into root spikes, which then can attack enemies for massive damage and act as a defense wall against the horde. You know, it would have been nice to have a tutorial before the level began, but I guess you can't ask for everything. Despite the flawed design, and it is flawed, awkward controls, and insanely random boss fights, I couldn't help but love this game. I don't know what's wrong with me. By all logical means, this is a game that any sane person who wants to avoid chucking their Vita across the room should avoid. However, I'm making plans to import the sequel if it doesn't get localized here. And if it doesn't get localized, I 100% understand why. Recap. Soundtrack, otherworldly. Art design, breathtaking. Story, disturbing yet engaging. Gameplay, please help me. Overall, I would say buy this game. Thanks for watching, and if you like this kind of slam underground review style that no one else is doing in the country, then go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, check out these 2 videos that I'm gonna post here. I might even create a hyperlink that'll take you to them. I probably won't immediately. See ya.